So A1. So generally, if I'm writing something up here, you should be also writing it as well. So they went through some different types of business organizations. Maybe you've heard some of those terms, right? But the most basic and simple one would be a sole proprietorship. And how many owners does a sole proprietorship have? One owner, right? One guy, one girl, whatever it is, okay? So let's make a little chart. So this is probably the easiest way. So the business type, right? And the big takeaway here is the liability for each type. All right, business type and liability. So for a sole proprietorship, since you're the only one that owns it, you get all the profits, don't you? Right? And that's the upside, isn't it? Well, what's the downside? You have all the liability. Well, liability for what? Losses and debts, right? Loan payments. If somebody sues you, right? So you are personally liable. For anything that happens, right? Any debts or judgments that are incurred against, and by personally, meaning that you might have to go into your personal checking or savings account to cover certain things, right? Right? And so the profit that you realize from a sole proprietorship also goes into your income, and it is taxed as personal income, not as business income, right? So it's just like money you get from a job, okay? So you're also liable for all the taxes on that. So what's the advantage of a sole proprietorship then? You're the only one there. What's the advantage? Do you have to share profits with anybody? You do not, right? Can you just make any decision if you like, within the bounds of the law, right? You can start making business decisions and not have to run it by anybody? Right, you're free. I mean, you're pretty much set some of the upside of this thing. But the downside would be what? You're personally liable for everything that happens, aren't you? Okay? So it's kind of there's always pluses and minuses to these things. Now, arranged somewhat like a sole proprietorship would be a partnership. Okay? What's the liability in a partnership? Remember from the reading? And by the way, not all partnerships are 50-50, right? Could be 70-30. What are you personally liable for? Let's say it's 70-30, and you own 70% of the partnership. 70% of anything that, right? Any debts or doesn't, right? That makes sense? Okay? Or 30 if you're the other guy, okay? So you're personally liable for your percent. Personally liable for your percent of ownership. Right. In the cases, a lot of times, 2 or 3 people might start a business and they all have different amounts that they can put in as a startup, right? Say, $100,000, and you say, yeah, I can kick in 35,000, right? So you have 35% liability, and also 35% of what? Profit, right? The upside, okay? So that's the upside. You get the benefits of your share of the profit. Again, though, it's a partnership, so any profits, whatever percent, are taxed as personal income, okay? So if you make more profit, you have to pay more taxes, okay? That makes sense? What's another disadvantage? Say you're in this with 3 other clowns. You want to make a decision. Yeah, you got to run it by 3 other people. What's an advantage though? Let's say that you need some money to upgrade or buy some inventory. What's an advantage of having partners? Yeah, I mean, there's more access to like working capital, it's called, right? Like if you don't have it, hey, Bill, you got 20 grand? Yeah. No problem, right? Now a corporation, and by the way, these 3 that I'm going to list they're like different levels in between each of these. But now a corporation is wildly different. Okay, corporation, now that's the thing where there are shares of stocks that get issued. Okay, does anybody know what a share of stock really is? What stocks are? Yeah.
It's when people put money into the business and they have partnership.
Kind of, yeah, but it's not a partnership. Well, if you use the term loosely and colloquially, yeah, but by the letter of the law, it's not actually a partnership. So, okay, so let's say that you buy 10 shares of stock of, I don't know, what shirt do you want? Nike, right? That means that you are an owner of the Nike Corporation. You are one of the owners. Anyone that holds a share of stock in that corporation is one of the owners. One share. You own some of Nike. Okay? Now, it's not a partnership or anything like that. Okay? You're not sharing in the profits or anything like that. But what you get to do, like if that stock share rises in value, we'll talk about why they rise and fall in value, then you could turn around and sell that share for more than you bought it for, right, to somebody else and make a little profit, okay? And that gets taxed differently than income. That's called capital gain, capital loss. So the tax treatment's a little bit different, okay? So shares, corporations are little bits of ownership. Now, just because you own one stock in Nike doesn't mean you can waltz in there and say, this is what we're going to do now. I'm in charge. No, you need to have, like, to be that guy, you have to have at least 51% of the issued and outstanding shares in your ownership. Okay? Yeah, well, it is. It is. You buying and selling stocks, gambling. It is, yeah, especially if you don't know what you're doing. And even if you do know what you're doing, it's still gambling, right? Because you can't. It's like trying to predict the weather 3 months out, right? And there's all many things that could happen. But there is a way to analyze and get a sense of, what things are more or less likely to do. But now your liability. Let's say that you own, 10 shares of Nike, and Nike gets sued for $50 million. How much of that $50 million are you responsible for if you own 10 shares? None of it. None of it. The only liability you have is the value of that share that you own. So if your share is worth $50, right, and the company gets into trouble, and they owe money, and they can't pay it, they can't ask you to help them pay that money. The only liability you have is the value of that share, which could then go down, right? See what I mean? So if that share is worth $50 currently, your liability is $50. Does that make sense? Until that share hits a value of 0. That's it. And it rarely happens, but, but anyway, so there's limited liability. If the company takes a big loss, you're not responsible. You don't have any liability in that loss. They make a giant profit. You don't get to gain, share of that profit unless they are dividend-paying stocks, right? Which is different than just a common stock, right? Now, dividend-paying stocks, they'll cost you a little bit more, but every so often, like usually every quarter or twice a year or once a year, the company will pay certain stockholders dividends if they make enough profit. So in that rare case, they're not as common anymore. Like if someone invests in dividend stocks now, it's usually like, little old ladies pass it around their kids. But they're not super common like they used to be. Okay? So that's just like a real raw general sense of it. Okay? Just enough to know now, like, these two are like treated like individual income, okay? You got liability as far as the eye can see, as far as, you know, you can afford. Corporation, if you own a share of a corporation, you're only liable up to the dollar value of that share, right? If it drops, then that's all you're out, okay? Which could be horrible in some cases, but, you know, you don't have, you know, they get sued, they don't come looking for you, okay? All right, so let's look at some examples then. One thing, simple math thing we have to remember is you guys know how to find percent, do you? Any, some chance? Doesn't it just look familiar? Part over whole times 100. Remember that? Okay, so we're going to use that in the next example. So let's take a look at example 1 there on page 465. Right? There, down here. So example number 1. What's going on there? So Michelle invests $15,000 in a partnership. Okay, so we know what kind of liability she's going to have. Personal liability that has 4 other partners. So how many partners are there altogether? 5. Okay, and she puts in $15,000. The total investment of all the partners, everyone kicked in all together, when you added it up, it was $240,000. What percent does Michelle own? Part over whole times 100. What's her part? Yeah, so the math of it is this: 15,000 divided by what? What's the whole? 240,000 times what? 100, right? And push buttons on your calculator, you get 6.25% ownership. Pretty simple example to start out with, right? Does that make sense? So she's entitled to 6.25% of any profits and liable for 6.25% of any liability or debts. Okay? So with that example, let's make sure we can do this. There's a check right down below there. We see the check below the example. This is your time to shine here. So why don't you all read that check over and see if you can work this out. Yeah. How about now? About 80, because they asked what percent do the other partners own. She owns 12.5. Well, we need to do 100 minus 12.5, 87.5%. And there's a trick you need to learn. Why did I emphasize reading comprehension earlier? Right? You got to be careful about reading things, because listen, in like the homework problems in this book, they're not like math problems you see. It's not like just solve this equation. No. What they do is you read it and they set up like a real situation for you to analyze and then apply the math, right? So you got to read carefully and look at the rest, right? Okay, let's go on to example 2 on the next page. Oopsie daisy. Thought I had. No. Example 2. They have issued 650,000 shares. By the way, I don't think I addressed this. Why would a company, why would a corporation issue shares for people to purchase? What does the company get in return for selling that ownership? What do you get in return for selling anything? Money, working capital, see? Okay, I guess I didn't cover that. So that's a way for a corporation to bring money in so they can operate, maybe expand. Maybe they want to expand and build another plant, right? So, okay, we're going to issue shares. And by the way, when the company first goes public, as you might have heard, that very first round of shares that they issued is called an IPO, initial public offerings, right? And And sometimes, man, I wish I'd gotten in on some of these, especially like for some of these type of things. I think Elon Musk just went public recently, didn't he? Right, SpaceX. What? So that means he's given up some control of his business, hasn't he? Right? Because every shareholder gets to vote at board meetings, even if you own one share. I don't think about that before earlier. You can go and vote, but your vote's only one share, right? So it doesn't count that much, but you are allowed to go and personally show up and vote. Most of them don't do that. Okay. So anyway, there's 650,000 shares issued and outstanding. Mike owns 12% of them. How many shares does he own? Well, that's pretty simple. 12% is what is a decimal? Which is, right, but 0.12, right? So we're going to work with a percent mathematically. Remember, we got to divide it by 100. Yeah? Move the decimal twice. So we just do 0.12 times how many shares? 650,000. And that means he owns 78,000 shares. Right? Of the 650,000. Does he have 51% ownership or greater than 50% ownership? No, he doesn't, right? So he can't go in and make final decisions about anything, can he? Okay? Right. Now, the way they set it up in the book, they did they set up a ratio. That's where we did the 12 or 100, right? And that's fine. They did a proportion, like the 12 is to 100 as X is to 650,000 and you cross multiply. That's fine if you want to do it that way. I think this just is much more efficient. So let's take a look at the check then, right below that. Make sure you can do the very same thing. Okay, so everybody read the check. Read it carefully. How many shares does Jillian own? 720 shares. There you go. It was actually straightforward. You ladies get that too? Okay, 720 shares. Easy enough. Okay, example 3 is a little more complex. I think we can handle it. I think it's a partnership. Yeah, 3 partners. Investing in a grand total of $900,000 to open a garden landscaping store. Their ratio. Their investments are in the ratio 2 to 3 to 5. So one partner puts in 2 parts, the other 3 parts, the other 5 parts. That's kind of like a lowest term ratio. Geometry guys, remember scale factor? The lowest term ratio. And there's like a K, right? Dilate. Okay. So this is not unrelated to that, actually. Let's forget if I'm recording or not. Am I? Yes, I am. Okay. So they want to know. They want us to write an expression for the amount that each partner invested. Well, 2 to 3 to 5 doesn't mean one put in $2 and the other 3, the other 5, right? There's some scale factor, right? The scale of 2 and the 3 and the 5, right? What's the scale factor? Your answer should be, I don't know. Well, what do we let stand for I don't know in math? Huh? Don't know when we let stand for I don't know? Come on. Like a letter. X? Yeah. Okay. So if we add up what they all kicked in, we're not adding 2 and 3 and 5. We're adding some multiple of 2 and 3 and 5. What was that multiple? I don't know. Oh, okay. So can we write down an expression or an equation right now that might help us with that? Let's model the situation. 2 to 3 to 5. All those numbers times something. That's X. And they all add up to a total of what? Well, the 900,000 is what I'm getting at. They will, I bet, right? But it is broken up into the 10 parts, right? So give me an equation here. One partner put in a share of 2 times what? X, we don't know. And then we add what the other partner put in, so plus what? 3x, and then the other one plus 5x, and that's the total of what they all put in, but what do they say that total is? 900,000. So could we figure out what each partner kicked in? Just combine like terms, so we need to solve for x, that's the multiple, right? So what do we get here? We get, it's a 10, right? So this is 10x equals 900,000. Divide by 10, you better not touch your calculators. Just move the decimal once. What do you get? Well, you were about to, weren't you? 90,000. That's not the answer to the problem, right? That's what x is. That's the multiple that they all kicked in. So how do we find what each one kicked in? Well, no, it's not. That would only if they put in equal amounts. So if x is that, and this is what the first partner put in, how do we find out the actual amount? 2x, right? So 2 times 90, I'll just put 90K. Like that? I think so. Listen, you know, you'll have to be the judge. I think I judge it to be okay here. Right? So the first partner put in what, $180,000? What about the other one? What did he put in? 270,000. And the big guy, 5 times that multiple, $450,000. So that's what they all kicked in. And you might just add those up to see if it should add to 900,000, right? Did it correctly? And, well, it is and it isn't. And that's kind of funny. It all depends on your life experience up to this point, 900,000. Yeah, for you guys, sure. For me, did it. But, you know, for some people, like Elon Musk, he's probably got that in his pocket. He makes that money. Yeah, right? Hey, I need $1 million. Oh, here. Here's $1 million bill. We don't even make those, but anyway. All right, so you guys get the setup in this. We did stuff like this in geometry, right? Okay. But you took geometry. Yeah. Well, I'll remind you, way back then, you did stuff like that. Okay. Let's take a look at the check and see if you can replicate this. Read that over. What's the equation we're going to set up? Anyway. 4x plus 5x equals what? 45,000. Just solve that. Be careful now. Remember, if you're adding, when you get x and circle it, you get all excited. No, I didn't call for x. Call mom and dad, and call the family. Will Billy solve for it? Well, Billy's not done. It's she. Could be, I guess. With Billy Jean. Yeah. What? Huh? I thought I heard something. Okay. So what do we get? 9x. What do we get for x, guys? Yeah. But that's not our answer, is it? What did they each invest? 20,000 and 25,000. So you did the 4 times 5,000 equals 20,000, and then 5 times 5,000 equals 25,000. Okay. Any questions on that? All right. A little more complexity. I think you guys got it. All right, just one more thing. There's the extend your understanding right below that. So let's read that over and see if we are comprehending things. This one can kind of go the other way. going backwards with this one. I'm reading it right. Percent. They each kick in 35%. So what percent of the business will they be owning? Each of them do 35.
Oh, so that's 70.
70%, right? Okay. So 35 plus 35 equals 70%. That's what they, right? And they need to find someone else to get the rest of the money required, right? So how do we figure out what percent that's going to be? 100 minus 70, huh? Right? So you have one guy that they need needs to kick in 30%. So it's like the answer to the first part. Does that make sense? But now, what ratio? Kind of like, you know, these problems up here, 2 to 3 to 5. Now they're looking for a ratio like that. And remember, I said that 2 to 3 to 5 is the lowest terms ratio. How are we going to figure that out? We don't have lowest terms, right? We got percentages, don't we? What are the 3 percentages? In what? Oh, in 30, yeah, sorry. Right. So 35 to 35 to 30, right? We can't write it as number over number because there's 3 of them, right? Well, we should make that lowest terms. You know how to do that, right? Let's not do it with decimals. Let's get lowest terms integers. You divide it by 10. I want to do it without decimals. What can I divide each of those numbers by? 5. Probably the biggest thing, right? So that actually gives us what? 7. Yeah, to 7 to 6. And now we're right back at lowest. Do you get the idea there? Okay. All right. Does anybody have any questions on any of this?